Press, a video interview series highlighting communications in business. I'm your host, Chris Cook. Joining me today is Scottie Rodgers, Director of Communications for the Goodyear Cotton Bowl. Scottie, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
It's good to see you. Scottie, you assumed this role as Director of Communications in August of last year and thrust into a unique situation for everybody, but for college sports as well. And then for bowl games, a bowl game that is traditionally well-staffed, well-attended. It's one of the best events, best run college athletic events. What kind of adjustments did you have to make from day one to start planning for a bowl game? A bowl game, by the way, that you had been associated with for 22 years as a volunteer on the media team. You've seen it at its full capacity. But what kind of adjustments did you have to make to pull this game off from a media perspective?
You know, it was two things. First, I'm coming in and replacing the legend in Charlie Fisk, who
Right.
have established the media operations of this bowl game as the premier bowl game in the country, especially in terms of what he has helped establish. You know, being a part of that media team, as you mentioned, so I knew it. And so when I came in, there wasn't any surprises on the expectations. The surprises was very simply on what was going to happen. You know, when I started in August, at that time, we didn't know if we were going to have a college football season, more or less a postseason. So we really had to, we were kind of working on two tracks. Number one, well, really three. One, we were trying to figure out, well, what happens if we have no games? What happens if we do have games? You know, because as you mentioned, not only do we have the bowl game, but we help manage the operations for the college football games that are here at AT&T Stadium. So at the time, we had two games, the Advocare Classic, which was going to be Alabama, USC, and then the Baylor Texas Tech game, which at that time, I'm sorry, not that game. It was Arkansas Texas A&M.
Right.
And at that time in August, we didn't know if those games were going to happen in early August. Then by the time August went through, we knew the first game wasn't going to happen, and then Arkansas Texas A&M as the decisions were made about the season. So really, we had to come in. One, you had to kind of work on the track that you were continuing on with the plans, but we also had to do a lot of monitoring what was going on in the college football space. As conferences and teams started playing games, we had to listen and learn and watch and see what they were doing, how they were handling their media credentialing process, how they were handling their weekly pressers, how they were handling their post-game news conferences, and then how we needed to adjust. And frankly, as it got down the stretch and closer to our game, we just had to figure stuff out. It was really pivot. We had a manual and we had a lot of things written down, but you know, to use a good football analogy, we just had to throw out the playbook and we had to start drawing up plays in the sand. You know,
But
one of the
you hope
biggest
that
things.
you hope that new playbook collects dust now.
Well, a little bit, and we'll hit on that a little bit. The biggest thing I would say I had to do, and we had to do, was to embrace the technology, and especially this forum right here, um, in Zoom, and for in particular, learning not only the this aspect of Zoom, but the webinar feature that is in Zoom. And I didn't know much about that at all, and outside of the name of it, but had to do some learning and had to do some on the job training, and then starting with our selection day news conference with our head coaches, you know, on through our post game news conferences that we had. We started using that technology and using the aspects of it to present our information, knowing that media, even if they were going to be here in person, we were going to be delivering their content and their access to coaches and student athletes virtually.
Do you feel like it worked well as it could?
I absolutely feel like it worked as well as it could. You know, as I was mentioning to you previously, you know, to give you a perfect example, on the, you know, 2 days after our selections, we have our, you know, because we couldn't have any events in person, our teams are only coming in the day before, and we were dealing with the Christmas holiday. You know, 2 days after selection, we had a virtual media day for our both of our teams, Florida and Oklahoma, and it turned out to be 5.5 hours of interviews between a morning session with Oklahoma and an afternoon session with Florida, in which, Oklahoma, we had head coach, defensive coordinator, and 8 student athletes. And with Florida, we had a head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and 4 student athletes. And we were able to give our media that were covering our game, whether they were affiliated with the teams or national media content that they had going into that, that was the 22nd. So that they had that information leading into Christmas, so that when our teams finally arrived in town on the 28th, we had content. One of the interesting notes out of that whole thing, our transcription company that we worked with, they did 90 pages of transcriptions on that day, on that virtual news conference day. So while we couldn't deliver people in person, we
Right.
definitely delivered content that media could have, and it gave them something for 4, 5, 6 days that they could use leading up until our teams arriving in town.
Well, I mean, there is no doubt, even with a pivot and doing things differently than and adjusting things drastically than what had been done previously, that it would be done well. Again, the Cotton Bowl always does that, is known for that. So kudos to you guys for pulling that off. You can see that, I proudly display my bolo here. I've got some more in bags somewhere, but I do get
Absolutely.
my Cotton Bowl bolo out. I'm proud of that. So going back to your career now, how did you get your start in athletic communications? I know you're a Roll Tide guy.
I am a Roll Tide guy, and that's exactly where it started. My sophomore year of college, I was able to start working there as a student assistant, and that just happened to be the fall of 1992. And if anybody knows anything about college football, that was a pretty unique year, and especially on the campus in Tuscaloosa. So I got to be a part of, and I was doing whatever they asked me to do. I didn't know much about it. I had written for the student paper for a semester in my freshman year, and going to the games and learning how press box operations work, the things you do in the office, the content. Now, granted, it was a much different time in 1992 in the way we were delivering content and information. I mean, Chris, that was before a website even existed.
Right.
So,
Right.
so it was a much different time in the way we delivered that stuff. But I was, fortunate to go through that first year. Obviously, experienced an unbelievable season there when it came to football. And I got to go to the national championship game that year. It was the Alabama-Miami game on
Mhm.
January 1st, 1993, in the Superdome, in the Sugar Bowl. And just that experience was transformative. And I always tell this point, I can absolutely tell you the day that I realized I wanted to do this, and it was that day, because I got to spend the last 8 minutes of that game on the field, and the game was over, and you see that iconic few minutes of video with Gene Stallings on the shoulders, and I'm standing in the background, and I'm looking up at the jumbotron at myself, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't know everything about what this is, but I think this is pretty cool, so I might want to try to do this. And from that point, I just became a sponge and got lucky by my senior year and was able to do a sport in women's soccer. As far as we were bringing back women's soccer as a varsity sport, so I was their first SID with the restart, and that experience and helping out at some SEC championship games got me exposed and learned about an intern at the SEC office, and that's I applied for it and luckily got it, and it kind of went from there.
That's, we've never talked about this, but that is very similar. I was writing for the school paper, had to do a story. I think it was the Sunbelt Conference cross country championships, and they said go to the sports information office. And I said, what is that? And I ended up leaving that very day volunteering. I said, can I volunteer work for you guys? And they said yes. And so kind of a similar start. I've just been really impressed by what they did, and thought it was interesting. And so taking the journalism degree and parlaying it there midway through college. But um, what's one of the most rewarding? It sounds like right there at the beginning, to help make that decision was a very rewarding moment in your career and defining moment in your path. But maybe what's a lesson or two you've picked up along the way that has put you where you are today?
Being willing to learn from those who know more than you. When you come young into business, you got a lot of energy, you got a lot of know-how, and you want to feel like you can just jump in and do everything, and you really can't. you
Somebody
got to
always
sit.
knows more. Somebody always knows more.
Somebody always knows more. And in that conference, there were so many legends that were working in sports information at the time. A couple of which are still working. From the Claude Feltons to the Bud Fords to the Herb Vincents to the Charles Blooms to the Larry Whites who got me started,
Yeah.
John Humanick, Kerry Tharp. I mean, the list goes on in that league. And I needed Langston Rodgers. I needed to sit back and learn. And when I got thrust into a full-time position 9 months into my internship, and I was doing women's basketball, which still to this day, and even then, women's basketball was massive in the SEC.
Right.
So I was dealing with some folks like a Debbie Jennings, for example, that I'm 1 year out of college, and I'm having to work with them on the quote unquote same level.
Right.
And I was nowhere close to being on the same level as them, but I had to carry myself in a way, but I also had to carry myself with deference and know that they know more than me, but I also had to make sure that I commanded the respect. And I hopefully I did that from just trying to have a good work ethic, trying to be a good person, be positive, bring high energy, and not be so full of myself, to be honest with you, and just try to come in and and be someone that people wanted to be around and people wanted to work with.
And all those people you named I mean, there could be several Mount Rushmores of college athletic communications people, and those are many of the people that would appear there. I want to jump into the College Sports Information Directors of America, which I was a member of when I was in athletic communications, and you're a member of now. You serve on several committees, and I'm going to read these off because I don't want to misname these. The Racial and Social Justice Initiative Planning Committee, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and the Black College Sports Information Directors Leadership Council. And you guys are active in expanding the representation of diversity and inclusion in college athletics. What progress have you guys been able to make, and what advice and resources are you providing to ensure that there is more diversity and representation in college athletic communications?
And I'm also on the special awards committee too. So I think what we try to do, and I mention that because it's important, because we have a conversation about rep when you start giving out awards and you want to recognize legends, we need to make sure that that is a diverse place. But
Right.
really,
Right.
the diversity and inclusion committee, I was asked to be on that, and we've done some great work to just open up the conversation. I mean, Chris, you were in the profession. I can say this, and this is just a straight fact. Our profession is not very diverse.
Right.
You know,
I
when you
agree.
look at the large number of the membership across all divisions, we're just, you add it all up, we're not diverse. But we do have a strong representation of people in the profession. And we want to try to give them people who look like me, people who represent the
Mhm.
diverse sides of our business, a bigger voice. That's number one. And number two, to add more diversity to our profession. And that's why we started diversity and inclusion committee, because we wanted to have some, we're doing some critical conversations, some things like that to break down the walls and have some good conversation, because we need everybody on board when it comes to diversity. It's not just people of color. It's
Right.
everybody. It's
Right.
everybody with all skin colors, all backgrounds, all perspectives in life. We need everybody pulling in that same way. And back in the summer, when obviously the social and racial unrest that was happening in our country, bubbled up to maybe you know a heated point that it hasn't in the past. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that. You know, myself and Jessica Poole, who works at Chicago State, who's on the board and is going to be the first. She's going to be the first African American woman to be president of COSIDA in a couple of years. Um, we started talking about how do we need to put together an initiative that was beyond the diversity and inclusion committee, that was really centered and supported by the board. And we presented that idea, and the board got behind it, and the national staff got behind it. And from that, we just want to create some critical conversations. And I think we've been able to do some great things. COSIDA for Change is the hashtag, and we have a page on the COSIDA.com website where you can go to that. One of the first things we want to do as communications people is be a resource. We wanted to create something so you can go to that page and you can find podcasts and webinars and books and information. Because one of the first things when you're attacking something like this, you got to know what to say and what not to say.
Right.
What's the right word? So we want, as the wordsmiths of college athletics, that's the first place we needed to start. And then through that, just having some more conversation across the board in our profession and really trying to get everybody to understand that it doesn't matter how big your school is, how many people you have on your staff, what's your ethnic background, what's your gender background, what's your sexual orientation background. We all have to pull together for diversity. And I think hopefully we've opened eyes to people to realize that everybody needs to play a role. And you can play a role in big ways, in medium ways, in small ways. And I think that's really important. And I think we've been able to do that and get things off the ground and build some momentum. We got a long way to go, but I think we have a lot of positive momentum right now.
Tell me about the COSIDA coffee shop you and your colleague are hosting this month.
Yeah. So, as a part of our racial and social justice initiative, one of the things we wanted to do is we've been doing basically a panel of some type a month. But for the month of February, we thought we'd take a step back and we're doing coffee shots. So every Wednesday, I'm hosting two of them. Actually, I have my first today here on February 10th. And now who's leading our racial and social justice initiative, Denise Thompson, who's at the Big Sky, she's hosting the other two. And we're just having various conversations, kind of in a more smaller, intimate setting using the Zoom technology, where we can have a conversation where we got about 20 to 25 people in a Zoom setting where we can have a conversation, a little bit open-ended, a little bit scripted, but we want to script it in a way that we can have some questions, but open-ended because we want people to have a safe space to have a
Right.
conversation. I think it's really important. If you're going to move this thing forward, you got to have safe space to have a conversation and ask a question that maybe you don't want to ask in quote unquote public. And you're not going to get judged on it because you're trying to find out information you don't know until you ask on a lot of things. So we want to be able to be a place where you can ask the question, provide some guidance. We don't know all the answers. None of us do, but maybe we can give some perspective because we sit it from a different lens, and maybe we can share something to somebody that doesn't see things the way some of us do, and maybe that helps them to give a broader perspective and maybe a better sensitivity about some of the things they're doing from just being a good person to doing their job.
Will these be archived on the COSIDA website?
The coffee shops we're not doing in that way, but our webinars that we are doing,
Okay.
because again, we're trying to create an opportunity to have a safe space in the conversation when things are recorded. Sometimes people don't
Fair
want to
enough.
share as much, and we don't want to do anything overly controversial, but we just want to give people a safe space to have open-ended and frank and conversation, because that's to me that's part of growth, and I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to grow our understanding across the board in the profession.
What advice would you give students? You think back to yourself when you were at the University of Alabama. Uh, what advice would you give students who are starting out, who want to do this as a career, as far as getting that experience in college and then applying for those first jobs? You touched on some of it earlier about listening, and there's always someone who knows more. What other advice would you give students?
I tell you, you got to come in and you got to become, to use a baseball terminology, you don't have to be a 5-tool player. You got to be a 7-tool player now. You got to be able to write. You got to be able to design. You got to be able to shape content plans. You got to be able to be creative on social. You might have to be able to edit a little video, whether that's being on camera or behind the
Right.
camera on the computer doing some things. You need to learn a little bit about everything, but you need to have some fundamental things. And most importantly, you have to learn to be a good communicator to the people that you're going to work with, and whether that's your colleagues that's going to be on your staff are the student athletes and coaches and administrators that you're going to work with. I think sometimes in our profession right now, with the focus on the digital aspects of it, I think the media relation side, and to me, the relationship side of our business gets kind of lost. And I think those who do well in this business have a strong understanding of how to communicate with people. Yes, your job is to communicate outwardly to your fan bases, to your external constituents about what's going on with the athletic department, but you have to be able to know how to communicate in your internal communications. And that's really, to sit down and understand where student athletes coming from. You're going to have, when you're early in the business, you're going to be crossing a lot of different sports, which means they're going to, then your young people will have come from a lot of different places.
Right.
And learning how to bring that story out in them. So many times people say, I had a student athlete and I didn't know, for example, she could play 5 instruments. Well, that's a great story.
Right.
That's a great, and you can have some fun with that too. I think a lot of times we want to get the great story because it might be a little bit of a tearjerker, or it might be something that touches your heart a little bit. And those are great stories. But there's some great stories that are just fun. They can do unique things. They've experienced unique things. They have, a family of athletes or a family of musicians or a family that's done different things. And I think finding ways to tell those unique stories is good. So I think learning how to do that in different ways, I think is really important, because I think then if you're young and you can do that, then you can walk into an athletic communications office, whether that's at a school and a conference office, and you can bring a lot of different things to the table to help round out the overall content strategy and what you're doing on your digital platforms.
Scott has great advice. With that, we can stop here. I appreciate your time. I can't thank you enough for doing this, and I look forward to seeing you down the road.
Absolutely. Take care, Chris.